Okay guys, welcome back to the second part of this tutorial. In the first part we took the original image, which is this one of a building, and we've wrapped basically a graphic onto it like this, which happens to be in a free wallpaper just for demo purposes. And we use the vanishing point and the filter feature to do this and to create the different dimensionals of perspective planes into which the image is placed. So that's just to recap. In this phase, what we're going to look at is how we create the adjustments. We also used masking, in order to leave areas, take out things where we didn't want the image to be enabled to use masking rather than cutting them out of the original. So the next phase really is to come in and put in these adjustments which just darken off walls and create shadows and highlights, etc. You can see slightly different from the last time, the original image. So we need to make a new set for this one. So I'm going to show you this second phase now. So you should have an image like this that you've placed if you followed the first tutorial. And then what we're going to do is now look at creating some tone and shadow detail, etc., to make it look realistic. We're also going to sort of partially cover this window. There's a kind of vinyl wrap technique which allows you to sort of put small holes in the poster so that light can still pass through and people can see out, but when you're outside it looks semi-opaque. It's often used on buses, etc. So I'll show you that first, just for those of you who are curious. What we want to do is bring up the mask so that we can see what's selected. The mask, if I hold down Alt and click on the mask, I can actually see what the mask looks like for this image. You can see the black areas are the areas which basically are not getting touched, and the white areas are the areas where the image will be displayed. Okay, so I'll step back. If you hold down Command or Control key, depending whether you're on Mac or PC, and click on the layer thumbnail, it should select all of the pixels within a layer. So if I do it on the actual layer thumbnail, it will select the wall area. If I do it on the mask, it will select all the mask areas. Okay. Now at the moment you can see with the mask that basically it is selecting the whole frame, and then these areas are going to be holes. So I want to just go to select, and I want to invert my selection, which is to select the exact opposite. Okay, so I now have just the window selected, and I only want to apply this effect to this window just for demo purposes. So I could use the minus or subtract from selection modification up here with the lasso tool. What I'm going to do is just hold down the Alt key on my keyboard, which does the same, and draw around the areas I don't wish to see this effect on. So I now only have that window. Now, this is a key part of Photoshop on working with masks, is this principle that you don't really want to keep making masks each time on every layer, because they might be subtly different. So by doing this, I ensure that this selection will fit perfectly the previous one. Okay, so I make sure that I have the mask selected, not the image. And then because it's a mask, I'm going to fill this with a mid-tone grey, 50%. Okay, so I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to go to Fill, and I'm going to choose Fill with 50% grey from the pop-up, and I'm going to hit OK. You can see the kind of simulated effect there. Okay, so it's not quite as accurate as actually using a proper pattern mask, but it gives you an idea of how powerful masks are. That mask has now got black areas where nothing is getting through, grey areas where 50% of the image is going to be shown, and white areas. We could also paint in if we didn't like it. We could come in, select the same area, just step back to where we had it grey, and obviously with the mask I could paint with either white or black. So if I wanted it to fade off towards the top, I could paint in, sorry, wrong one. I need to just change my opacity way too strong and just enlarge my brush. So I could make it less strong at the top. You get the idea. Okay, so that's just for information purposes for anybody who wants to be able to do that, and also to give you an idea of how masks properly work. They are grayscale values. At the moment on this one, we're only using black and white, but obviously that could change. So bear that in mind. Now, I want to make modifications to the walls, which is what we're here for. I'm just going to move the image across a little bit and zoom up so we can get it in the frame. I'm going to hold down the Command key on the Mac, I think it's Control key on Windows, and click on the layer thumbnail, not the mask. Okay, that's going to select all the pixels within that layer. Okay, then I'm going to basically deselect this central wall. Okay, so I've got a wall here that needs to be darkened and a wall here that needs to be darkened. It's probably easier if I can see the effect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be making an adjustment layer. I'm just going to pull the layers palette off for the moment, because otherwise you're not going to get to see this. It's at the bottom of the layers palette. Just going to dolly up my layers palette, just hide that folder for now. We're going to be recreating these. So at the bottom of your layers palette, you've got an adjustment layer. These are basically layers which use masks and say when you look at this bit of the image, change it in some way. So I'm going to create a curves adjustment. What that does is it brings up the curves palette. If you're not familiar with curves, it's one of these things just to experiment with. This is effectively the black and the white end of your image spectrum. So I want to basically darken this side, because when I look at the building, this wall is just slightly darker than this wall, and this wall is quite a bit darker. So I'm going to start by darkening it fairly significantly. I've just pulled it down about a quarter, maybe less. Okay, fifth maybe. I'm just going to leave it at that for the moment so I can see the issues. You can see it creates a mask, and it says when you're looking at this area that's shown in the mask, then do this. So in other words, darken off the white end. Now I'm going to take the lasso tool. Just going to zoom in a little bit so I can see, and I'm going to click, and I'm basically going to select that central area, the whole of it. Like so. So I'm using the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm just making a selection. I can now click on the mask, and I can hit the delete or backspace key. Excuse me, wrong one. I've got my things flipped. Just undo. Okay. If you have your default set to white at front, black at the back, and you hit your backspace key, it'll fill with the background color. In other words, black in this case on the mask. So in other words, it's going to ignore that area. So we can already see that looks dramatically better. Okay, just need to deselect. Okay, so it looks a bit more realistic already. It looks a bit three-dimensional, almost looks like it's on the building. You can see how the lighting is quite considerably darker on this edge than these two sides. But on this edge, it's not as much. So when I come in, this is probably a bit too strong. Again, I'm going to select just time with the marquee tool around the whole of that side, come up to my curves, and I am just going to go to image, adjustments, and levels. Now, again, I have the mask selected, and I'm going to adjust the levels on that mask. And by moving this midpoint, usually, sorry, not midpoint, I want to change the white end, which is this end. I'm going to use the output rather than the input levels. I'm dragging the wrong thing. If I dial this up, this is where the white in the mask is now going to become effectively 30–40% grey. So you can see there's a tonal change, but it's not as dramatic as this one. Okay. In the mask sense, I've made it grey, pretty much like we did 50%. I could use the same thing I did earlier, but I'm just knocking it back in for layman's terms. Final thing is, I don't want it to darken the windows. Okay, so I'm going to use the same elements from this mask. I'm going to hold down the Command or Control key, click on the mask to select the areas I don't want, remembering that it's actually selecting everything but. So I then need to invert my selection so that just these areas, you see the little marching ants, are selected. Come back to my adjustment layer and hit delete, okay, or backspace. And if you're observant, you'll notice that it just chop them out of the mask. So that's effectively what's happening on the mask. Okay, so I'm pretty much there. The final thing that I need to do, just move my layers palette over slightly, dock this one over, is I just want this wall looks a bit too light at the bottom end here. So I want to do pretty much the same thing now, but with this area here. And I want it to be a bit darker. If that was a light wall and this was in shadow, obviously I'm going to get this area is not going to be quite as bright as that. Just going to make this a little bit more pronounced so we can see how dark that looks. So this looks too bright for me. In reality, this would be blocked by some of this wall sticking out. So we need to fade it in layman's terms. So again, Command or Control, click on the thumbnail to select the wall. Then I'm going to hold down Alt as well as Command, and I'm going to click on the layer thumbnail above. That's going to remove the new selection from this one. Okay, let's do it a different way, make it a little less simple, a little easier, sorry, a little less complex. So click deselect. Right, start again. Hold down Command or Control, depending Mac or PC. Click on the layer thumbnail to select it. It is the same as going to select, load selection, picking whatever the layer is called. Okay, so layer 3 or what have you in here, and I can pick the mask. Okay, I'm doing it a slightly different way this time. I'm going to take the polygonal lasso tool, zoom in again, hold down spacebar, drag over, and I want to just cut out this area. So I'm just going to take minus, come down to the bottom, and I'm just going to cut off this end. I won't worry about the rest for the moment. Just zoom back so you can see it all. Next thing I want to do, adjustment layer. Again, curves. Again, I'm going to drag the white point down. Not quite as far, but far enough that looks more realistic. Now you can see it's applying it to the whole wall. I obviously don't want that. So when I'm okay with that, I'm going to again reselect by hitting with Command on the layer mask, and I want to use a gradient. What the gradient's going to do is I'm going to go from a white area, which is where I want the shadow. In other words, the white object, remember, get affected, the black doesn't, to black. So I'll make sure I've got a white and black color swatch. I'm going to click down on the left here and drag up. Okay, so this area is going to be darker. You can see I can do it at any point on the image. Okay, but obviously I want it up this end. I just want to get that idea of a bit of shadow in that corner, not too much, but just a hint of it. Okay, so that if it was a real 3D space, obviously this wall would be blocking some of the light hitting that wall. With that little adjustment, you can see it looks a lot more realistic. The only thing is it's darkened the window and this bit of wall. Be careful with these adjustment layers. So again, Command or Control, click on the mask. Again, select inverse, come up to my mask, hit backspace, it cuts them out. So I have that little bit darkening this side of the wall. Again, because it's independent, I can control it. I can also control how it blends. If you've got a yellow color here and you use just normal black, it will probably make it look dirty and a bit green. So sometimes you might want to change to things like luminosity instead. Luminosity tends to take on the color underneath, so in this case with the cream it looks less dirty perhaps, so you can adjust these layer blends. You've also got obviously your opacity settings, and you can go in and adjust the levels if they're too harsh or not on any of these masks. The beauty of masks, they're a bit fiddly when you first learn them. If you haven't managed to stay with me, watch it again. It is probably not the world's greatest tutorial, to say the least, but it is extremely powerful, this kind of masks and adjustment layers. These are dynamic things that I can turn on and off. So I could now replace that background image and these would dynamically be applied to whatever I put in there. But as you can see, that's looking fairly believable. Obviously, there'd be an issue with trying to actually make this in the real world. It might not be that straightforward. Some of these things can't simply be printed in vinyl, but you get the basic idea. More importantly, so does the client.